When we think of ceratopsians, those are the dinosaurs with the horns on their head, the number one animal that comes to mind is Triceratops. But there was a bunch, and I mean a bunch, of different kinds of ceratopsians. In today's podcast, we are going to talk about one of my favorites.
Welcome to Dinosaur George Kids, a show for anyone who loves dinosaurs. Dinosaur George has studied paleontology for over 50 years and has performed live to over 4 million students across the world. So sit back and enjoy today's show. Now, here's Dinosaur George.
Hey there, future paleontologists. I'm Dinosaur George. Welcome to the podcast, everybody. This is podcast number 108, the 108th podcast. If you like dinosaurs and prehistoric life, well, I think you will enjoy this podcast. We now record and post these podcasts on our YouTube channel. You can find that, go to YouTube and search under Dinosaur George, and you can watch the podcast if you'd like. There's not a lot different on the video podcast than there is on the audio, except for you can see me talking, but I don't know if that's much of a treat. But for those of you that like to watch the podcast, go to YouTube, and while you're there, give us a like and follow, subscribe, and that way you'll be alerted to all the new ones. If you like listening when you travel, then clearly you found me because you're listening right now. So it is so nice to be able to talk to you all and check to see how everybody's doing. I just got back from Montana. I spent 4 days up there digging up dinosaurs, and I unearthed the longest complete dinosaur bone I've ever found. And I've dug dinosaurs for a long time. This bone was really long. It was the lower arm bone of an Edmontosaurus. Edmontosaurus is a big duck-billed dinosaur. That's the nickname we gave them. They're called hadrosaurs. I found a really big one. I think it was 22 and a half inches. I don't know how that factors out to centimeters. You'll have to do the calculations because I can't off the top of my head. But that's a pretty big lower arm bone for an Edmontosaurus. So that would have been a big one. That might be the longest radius, the lower arm bone of an Edmontosaurus I've ever seen. That might be the yeah. Now that I think about it, I think it is. Anyway, I found that a lot of vertebra. Did not find my Tyrannosaur tooth. That was my goal this time. I wanted to either find a Nanotyrannus tooth or a Tyrannosaurus Rex. Didn't find either one of them. I wish I had. But I found a really good Edmontosaurus tooth. I found some Triceratops teeth. Let's see. What else did I find? Oh, I found the ilium. That's part of the hip bones. I found the ilium of what I think is either a baby duckbill or maybe it's a Thescelosaurus. We're going to have to look at it a little closer to figure out which is which. Sometimes when you find a single bone, you may not be able to figure out what you're looking at. That's the problem. Now, the place that we went is kind of a cool place. We call it a channel deposit. What that basically is there was an ancient river, and it had periodic flooding, like seasonal flooding, like it flooded probably once every year. Well, any dinosaur that had died that previous year, its bones may be laying in the floodplain, meaning the bones are there, there's nothing around it, there's just the skeleton. But when the flood comes, it could wash those bones downstream. Also, you can have dinosaurs that are alive that are trying to maybe escape the flood and maybe they drown and their body floats downstream. Well, the bodies are floating or tumbling down this flooded river, but then there's a big bend in the river, a big curve. What happens is those bones and those skeletons, those dinosaur bodies, can get lodged on that corner. They get stuck in the corner. So you get a big variety of different dinosaur bones all being sort of jumbled together. So when we dig in that site, we don't find skeletons. We find a lot of bones. And what's weird about it is you can find a Triceratops bone next to a duckbill bone, next to a thescelosaur bone, next to a predator teeth, crocodile teeth, gar scales. Gars are fish that are still alive today. So we find all of those things sort of jumbled up in that spot. So the cool thing about that spot is you find a lot of stuff. It's not going to be articulated skeletons. What articulated means is put together. An articulated skeleton is kind of what you see in all the movies where you see like a whole skeleton laying there and you see all the paleontologists with their brushes clearing away everything and you see the whole skeleton. That's called an articulated skeleton. That doesn't happen very often. That's rare because when a dinosaur dies, carnivores can come eat him. Scavengers can tear the body apart. The body can be washed and covered by mud. To become a fossil, you kind of got to be buried in something, and mud is a pretty common thing. Well, where there's mud, there's running water, and where there's running water, you have motion and movement, and those things can break apart the skeleton. So anyway, I just got back from Montana about 3 days ago. I had such a good time. Weather was beautiful. I had such a good time, and I'm going to upload some of those pictures on our Patreon Club page, so everybody that's a Patreon Club member can see some of those bones. If you'd like to be a Patreon Club member, go to dinosaurgeorge.com and click on the Join the Club page, or you can just search Dinosaur George on Patreon. And if you'd like to join the club, we'd love to have you with us. And so anyway, that's what I'm doing. I just got back from that. It's very exciting. All right, as of a few minutes ago, before I came into this studio, we've had 1,232,000 downloads of this podcast. That number still fascinates me. We're heard in 182 countries and 16,650 cities around the world. So for everyone out there all around the world, thank you very much for listening. Thank you for watching if you're watching on YouTube. I appreciate you so very much, and we couldn't do it without you. I'm based near San Antonio, Texas, and if any of you are going to be coming to San Antonio, Texas in July or August, the year's 2024, in case you're watching this video or listening to this podcast 10 years from now, on July 6th and 7th, 2024, at the San Antonio Zoo, I am doing a talk each one of those days at 11 o'clock local time. So if you would like to come out and say hi, if you would like to come out and introduce yourself, if you're a listener or a viewer, please come out, let me know you're here to see me, and I will make sure to give you a shout out on an upcoming podcast or video. Also on August 17th and 18th, same thing. I'm speaking at 11 o'clock that afternoon on both of those days. So if you're in or around San Antonio, they have a bunch of robotic dinosaurs out at the zoo. The zoo is magnificent, but they've got some really cool stuff with dinosaurs out there as well, and that's why they're having me come out and talk. July 6th and 7th and August 17th and 18th, all 4 of those days, I'm speaking out at 11 o'clock. All right, I got to give a shout out to Chasmosaurus Rex, who came all the way from Colorado to my store in San Antonio, and I wasn't there. Now, sometimes when people come, if my staff knows that I'm available, they'll contact me to see if I can do a FaceTime, just at least to say hello to people that are nice enough to come all the way to San Antonio to see my museum and store. Unfortunately for Chasmosaurus, I couldn't. I was in a meeting, and I am so sorry. So Chasmosaurus Rex and your family, thank you for coming out to the store and the museum. I hope you liked the museum. I hope you saw some cool stuff. Thank you so very much for coming out. I apologize that I was not there. Okay, I mentioned Patreon. One of the benefits of being a T-Rex member of the Patreon Club is you get a birthday shout out in the month of your birth. And so we're going to be doing June. Now, somebody asked me, why do you wait so long when you do these shout outs? Why don't you do them at the beginning of the month? Here's why. A lot of people listen to the podcast, and a lot of people want to become Patreon Club members, and they might join in the month of their birth. Like they might get a birthday gift to be a Patreon Club member. Well, if I do them at the very beginning, then if your birthday happens to be in June and your family is going to give you a Patreon Club membership, you don't get your shout out. So we wait towards the end of the month. Now, there were some people who joined late, and I missed their birth dates. So I want to start off, and again, birthday shout-outs are only for the T-Rex members. You got to be a T-Rex member to get a birthday shout-out. So Link Raptor had turned 8 on April the 13th, but I missed his. So I wanted to say hey and happy birthday to Link Raptor. Ada Raptor turned 10 on May the 14th. I missed his. And Jasperolophus turned 7 on May 25th. So I wanted to do some makeups for you because I missed all of you before. Now let's get into the June birthdays, and here we go. Stella Gamersaurus turned 8 years old on June the 1st. Stella Gamersaurus. These names, by the way, just so you all know, one of the cool things about our club is you get to give yourself a nickname. And that's the nickname. That's so cool. JC Saurus turned 6 years old on June the 4th. Nico Raptor from San Diego turned 9 on June the 6th. Cha-Cha Hurricane Ben turned 7 on June the 7th. Jibby Raptor turned 7 on June the 7th. Willosaurus turned 4 on June the 8th. Pachyrhona Rhinoceros turned 10 on June the 11th. Maxosaurus Rex turned 7 on June the 12th. Therizino Bentley turned 7 on June 14th. Indominus Wes turned 7 on June 14th. Leuciopteryx turned 8 on June 15th. Mosasaurus turned 9 on June 16th. It's a great name. Abram, turned 6 years old on June 18th. Tyrannosaurus Dex. I see what you did there. Tyrannosaurus Dex turned 5 on June the 18th. Eonopteryx turned 9 on June 23rd. Today is June 24th, and this happens to be Killian's 7th birthday. So, Killian, it's your birthday today. Raptor George turned 6 on June 27th. Leo Tyrannus turns 8 on June 27th. Theoraptor turns 4 on June 27th, and on June 29th, his Mamasaurus is having a birthday. Happy birthday to both of you. Leosaurus is turning 5 on the 29th, and Michael Raptor turns 6 on June the 30th. So, I would sing happy birthday to all of you, but something really bad happens every time I do that. There is a little raptor named Cha-Cha-Cha Raptor who attacks me every single time I sing. So I'm not going to sing. I'm just going to wish you all a happy B-Day. Phew. Okay. Let's talk about today's feature creature.
It's time for our feature creature segment. If you would like to suggest a creature, go to the Dinosaur George Kids Podcast page at dinosaurgeorge.com or post your suggestion on the Dinosaur George Kids Facebook group page. Now, here is your feature creature.
All right. Today's feature creature is a member of the Ceratopsian family, and that's the family that includes, oh my gosh, Triceratops, Pachyrhinosaurus, Monoclonius. No, I don't think Monoclonius is a valid name anymore. Centrosaurus, Styracosaurus. Oh my gosh, there's so many of them. Coelosaurus. There's so many Ceratopsians. But Chasmosaurus is today's focal animal. Now, some people pronounce it Chasmosaurus. Perfectly fine. Perfectly fine. Again, for those of you that are new to my podcast, one of the things that I try to make clear to everyone is that just because you hear me pronounce a name a certain way, and maybe it's different from the way you pronounce yours, there's nothing wrong with that. Some people say Diplodocus, I say Diplodocus. Some people say Diplodocus. They're all three correct. Brachiosaurus, Brachiosaurus, they're okay. Ankylosaurus, Ankylosaurus. It's okay for you to pronounce a name differently when most of these names are in Latin or Greek. And so when you are transcribing those languages to your language, your pronunciation might be a little bit different. There is the Caribbean Ocean, and some people say Caribbean, and they're both okay. Wait, they're the sea. They're not an ocean. They're a sea. Caribbean Sea. Yeah, sea. So there's nothing wrong. I pronounce it Chasmosaurus. Its name is spelled Chasmosaurus. Chasmosaurus, Chasmosaurus. I just pronounce it Chasmosaurus. Its genus name is Chasmosaurus. Its species name is Belli. Genus and species, that's kind of like its first and last name. All animals have a first and last name. There's only one dinosaur we always call by its genus and species name. You know it. King of the dinosaurs, Tyrannosaurus Rex. Tyrannosaurus is its genus name, Rex is its species. But we don't hardly call any other dinosaur by the genus and species name. We don't ever say Chasmosaurus belli, or we don't say Allosaurus jamadsoni, or we don't say Stegosaurus stenops or Triceratops horridus. We just don't do that. But with Tyrannosaurus, that cool last name Rex makes him sound really cool. So Chasmosaurus, there's more than one species of Chasmosaurus. Chasmosaurus belli is the most common. There's a couple of other species, and what happens is you can find the remains of a dinosaur that you know what genus it is, but there's enough of a difference to justify giving it a different last name, a different species name. But Chasmosaurus belli is the most common. The name Chasmosaurus means opening lizard. Opening lizard. What does that mean? Well, you have to remember when dinosaurs were first discovered, the earliest paleontologists thought they were giant lizards. And the word dinosaur in Latin meant terrible lizard. And so the name is terrible lizard. Now, we know they're not lizards. Dinosaurs are not giant lizards. So, but the name is still used in the description of the animal. So in this case, opening lizard gets it. They get the name because in the frill, there's two large holes, two openings. Have you ever heard of a chasm? A chasm is like a deep valley in the ground or a ditch in the ground, a chasm. And so Chasmosaurus means opening lizard. It's an herbivore. It eats plants. Herbivores eat plants. Omnivores eat meat and plants. I was at a school one day, and I was asking these kindergarten kids, do you know what an herbivore eats? And some of them knew, but most of them were confused. And I said, well, have you ever heard of your parents cooking with herbs? Well, herbs are plants. So an herbivore eats, and all the kids yelled, plants. And I said, good job. I said, now what do you think a carnivore eats? And a little girl screamed, cars. Yes. So herbivores eat plants. Carnivores eat cars. Omnivores eat omnis. Oh, my gosh. So it's an herbivore. They are quadruped. That's their means of locomotion. Locomotion means movement. Like, have you ever heard of a train called a locomotive? Locomotion means movement. So how do they move? They walk on all fours. They don't stand up on their back legs and walk. They walk on all fours, their hands and their legs. So they are called a quadruped. They lived during the late Cretaceous between 77 to 76 million years ago, and they are found in Canada, but they probably lived, I would think they lived as far north as maybe Alaska and maybe as far south as Texas. See, the lack of evidence doesn't mean the animal didn't live there. It means that it hasn't been found yet. When we look at dinosaurs in a certain part of the world, if there is no ocean to separate them from getting to another area, they may have migrated to that other area. But in order to become a fossil, remember I said you have to be buried in something. And so let's say, for instance, during the flooding season in Canada, maybe Chasmosaurus came down to like Montana or South Dakota, and there they spent the rainy season there. Well, since they're not where it's flooding, they don't get buried as easily. So they're in a spot down here where they're not as easily buried, maybe. So now there are certain things, like for instance, elephants in Africa, back before there were humans, elephants didn't go from one corner to the other of the continent because some areas they preferred. They were used to a certain environment. So just because North America was big during the late Cretaceous and there was a lot of room, it doesn't mean that every single dinosaur went from one end to the other, because some areas would have been colder, like the upper parts of Canada and Alaska. They would have been colder in the wintertime, and the heat may have been more intense south during the summer. Some animals don't like the cold. Some animals don't like the cool or the warm. And so they don't just walk everywhere. They would be limited to their environment. But right now, what we know of Chasmosaurus, we know from Canada. Now, this dinosaur is considered a medium-sized dinosaur. It was between 4.3 and 4.8 meters long. That's 14 to 15, almost 16 feet long, but still big compared to you and I. It weighed 1.5 to maybe 2 tons, or 2,200 to 5,000 pounds. So that's still big compared to us, but that's a relatively smaller member of the Ceratopsian family, especially when you compare it to like Pachyrhinosaurus, or you compare it to, who else? Triceratops. Listen, they're big compared to this dinosaur. It's sort of a medium-sized dinosaur. It was discovered in 1898 in Alberta, Canada, but they only found a few bones. But then in 1913, they found nearly a complete skeleton, and it had skin impressions. What are skin impressions? Well, it's not really the skin necessarily. Imagine you take your thumb and you push it in a piece of clay and you take it out. Well, there's a print of your thumb print in that clay, right? That's not your thumb, but it's a print of your thumb. And so you could leave an impression of your skin. So imagine when these dinosaurs die, if they get buried in a flood or whatever covers them, a landslide or whatever, as the dirt piles up on top of them, that dirt is pressing down. That pressure is what can leave the skin impression. Now, in some cases, we do find mummified skin, where we're finding the actual skin of the animal. It's turned to stone, but it's mummified. So there is some cases where you can find evidence of skin impression on dinosaurs. We see it in duckbills. Carnotaurus is notorious for they found Carnotaurus skin, Triceratops skin. Just 4 days ago, I was looking at a big Triceratops covered in fossilized skin. So they found the impressions of it. Well, what happened was, originally it was described in 1914, but the person that described it thought it was related to another ceratopsian called Torosaurus. So they named this one Protorosaurus. That was the first name. But Protorosaurus turns out a different, and by the way, pro means before. So Protorosaurus would mean before Torosaurus. So it lived before Torosaurus. But the name Protorosaurus had been given to something else. So that meant that they could not give two animals the same name. So after they found these complete skull and they saw these big holes, that's when they came up with the name Chasmosaurus. And there's a variety of, I remember I told you earlier, there's a variety of different species within Chasmosaurus. That's because they find some variations in the skull. There's some variations between them. Usually there has to be enough difference. Okay, there has to be enough similarities to know which genus it belongs to, but there has to be enough difference to know if it gets its own species name. So if you look up the name Chasmosaurus, you might see other species listed. I don't remember them off the top of my head, but you might see that, or you will see it with Chasmosaurus. So it's a smaller member. Now they found several skulls, which I find fascinating. And there are some variations between them. That might also be something we call sexual dimorphism. And what that means is difference between the male and female of the animal. We see that in animals today, right? Deer, perfect example, white-tailed deer. Males will grow antlers, females will not. That's sexual dimorphism. That's a difference between them. We see it in elephant seals. The big male with the gigantic proboscis, that only occurs on the male. They look different than the female. That's for the same reason. So some of these variations could be variations between the sexes. Now, the one thing that I like about Chasmosaurus belli is that the brow horns, your eyebrows are over your eyes, and that's where those horns are located, so we call them brow horns. That's how they got the name, eyebrow, brow horns. They have relatively small brow horns. They're not very big. They're certainly not big like Triceratops or any of those guys. And they have a nasal horn. Nasal means nose. So you have brow horns and a nasal horn. And so all three of those horns are relatively small, giving this dinosaur kind of an interesting look. These big openings in the frill, there's a lot of debate as to why. If the frill is used for defense, if there's two holes in it, that doesn't seem like it would be a very strong defense. But because this dinosaur is sort of a medium size, I don't think it's hanging around to fight because it has small brow horns. It's not made for a fight. It's made for running. Its defense, in my opinion, was to run. Now, there's a lot of energy behind an animal that weighs over a ton. There's a lot of energy there. If it runs over you, it's going to crush you. It doesn't need its horns necessarily. But because the horns are little and the frill, the shield on the back of the skull, already has two large openings, it suggests to me that these animals they're not fighters. They're runners. Triceratops, totally different critter. Big, thick, heavy-duty shield. Big horns. Those things, in my opinion, are stand your ground and fight. But I believe Chasmosaurus was a runner. It would have escaped predators by its speed. So what was the function of the frill openings? Well, it would have made the skull much lighter because since there's not bone in those big holes, it doesn't weigh as much. And again, that leans towards the idea of being a runner because it's lightening the load, right? A race car doesn't carry around bricks because bricks make it heavier and it can't go fast. So in my opinion, I think Chasmosaurus is absolutely built for running. It doesn't have to be a speed demon. It just has to run faster than the predators that are hunting it. So we know from the frill that they would have been covered in a thin layer of keratin. Keratin is what your fingernails are made of. There's a lot of debate whether they may have been brightly colored. I believe they were. I believe that the frills were used as colorful designs to attract a mate, to scare away a rival, or to threaten a predator. So imagine this. There are butterflies that when they open their wings, they have two big round, they look like eyes. That's meant to scare a predator. A bird swoops in and a butterfly opens its arms and all of a sudden the animal you think was this big, suddenly it's got giant eyes. You might think, oh my gosh, that thing's a predator. Fish do the same thing. Fish have false eyes. I believe that Chasmosaurus, I think there was a thin layer of keratin, and I think where the holes were, I think they may have been round and looked like eyes. I think they may have been colored intentionally that way. For those of you that like projects, if you follow me on the Dinosaur George Kids Facebook group page, it's free. I encourage anyone that listens to this podcast or watches the podcast on YouTube, I would encourage you to go follow us on the Dinosaur George Kids Facebook group page because you can post pictures there and you can post questions and videos and that kind of thing. Parents, I try my best. We have a team that keeps an eye on that page to try to make sure that nothing bad is ever posted there. We're very quick to react, and we have a lot of parents on that page that help us as well. So it's a very family-friendly place to go. So if you like a project, here's what I'd like for you to do. I would like for you to draw a picture of a Chasmosaurus, but on the frill, I would like for you to draw eyes in the spot where the holes are. I want you to draw those eyes. Now, some of you might have a Chasmosaurus toy. I don't want you to draw on your toy unless your parents tell you it's okay. But I would like to see, if you have a Chasmosaurus figure, I'd like to see a picture of it. But if you are a good artist, even like I'm not a good artist, but I can still draw, I would love to see you draw a picture of Chasmosaurus, and I'd like for you to make big eyes, or what look like eyes, on those two openings. All right. Now, they also had small little pieces called osteoderms around the edge of the frill, little bumpy things. Those things, I think, first of all, would have made the frill a little bit stronger, right? Because there's a little more protection. But those, I think, might have helped each member of that family recognize the other. See, we use our faces. We recognize people's faces. But when you look at a herd of cows, sometimes they all look the same. How does who know who? And they do. They do. Let me tell you something. I grew up on a ranch. We raised cows. We would have cows that would have calves. Those calves would grow up to be adults. And the mom and the adult sibling or baby or offspring recognize each other all the time. They would come out, greet each other. They knew who the other one was. It was smell, but it's also vision. They see some visual differences. So the little osteoderms around the outer edge of the frill, in my opinion, were probably used as a way to kind of say, hey, this is me, because they all looked a little bit different. Now, in the case of Chasmosaurus, we can tell a lot by looking more closely at the skull. One of the things you'll notice is its nose, its mouth, we call it the beak, because it looks like a beak, was much thinner, more narrow. And that then means something. You see, when you are a plant eater, let's take a duckbill, or let's take an Ankylosaurus. Ankylosaurus has a big, wide, flat mouth. That's meant for grabbing any plant it saw, big mouthfuls of everything. If there's 5 or 6 plants growing together, that big, wide mouth could grab a chunk of all of them and rip them up and eat them. That probably means Ankylosaurus was not a very picky eater. He's low to the ground. He can't reach up high. You don't want to be too picky when you're really low to the ground because you have limited food. But with Chasmosaurus, the narrow mouth suggests that it was more particular in what it ate. It doesn't want mouthfuls of everything in front of it. The narrow mouth allowed it to pick out certain plants that it liked. So it sort of suggests that it was a little more selective in how it ate. A lot of animals are like that. If you look at a deer, the mouth of a deer is not wide because it's very particular what it wants. Look at the mouth of a crocodile. It's wide enough to grab anything. So the shape of the mouth gives us a lot of information. If you go back and look at some of your dinosaur toys or your dinosaur figures, take a look at the mouth and think about it differently than you have before. Look at that mouth and think to yourself, is that a selective hunter? Is their narrow skull mean that they're more particular in what they eat? Or do I have a big, gigantic Tyrannosaurus mouth that means anything that moves, I grab? So anyway, that's something that I think is kind of interesting about this dinosaur. Now, I mentioned that they had skin impressions, and that was near the right hip area. There's something of interest. There is some technology that exists now where scientists can use lasers and shoot the laser at the fossilized skin area. And it can determine if there is ever any color pigment there. The pigment, they're called melanosomes. That's what makes us whatever color we are. The color pigment in our body is what determines what we look like. Not what we look like, but what shade or what color we are. Some people have more melanosomes, so they're darker skinned. Some people have much lighter melanosomes, they're very lightly skinned. And so they can find these color pigments, and it can help determine the color of the dinosaur. It is incredible. They did it with Psittacosaurus. We now know what color Psittacosaurus is because they found those fossilized melanosomes. Those pigment colors are there. You just have to look at them with an electron microscope. You can't see them with a microscope or a magnifying lens. You got to use a super powerful one. So is it possible that one day they'll be able to test that skin to see if there's any color pigment? That would be amazing. That would be so cool. They found the skeleton of a baby, estimated to be 3 years old. This is the coolest thing. I was in Alberta, at the University of Alberta, with paleontologist Dr. Philip Curry. Dr. Curry and his wife took me behind the scenes to go look at, and by the way, his wife is an outstanding paleontologist as well, Dr. Eva Koppelhuis. They're such nice people. They took me behind the scenes to show me some of the things that they were working on. And there was this baby Chasmosaurus. I wanted to cry. I was so overwhelmed with emotion. I got to pick up and hold in my hand the skeleton of a little baby estimated to be 3-year-old Chasmosaurus. It was fascinating. Fascinating. If you want to see a picture of the baby, just search baby Chasmosaurus or juvenile Chasmosaurus, and you'll ultimately find that picture. It's so cool. When you see that skeleton, I'm just going to make you jealous. I got to hold that thing in my hands. That is so cool. So with that little baby, it makes us realize there is no way that baby could have survived in that environment without the protection of an adult. It's just not going to happen. I know some people disagree with that, but I'm telling you, in my opinion, I am 99.9% certain that baby dinosaurs were raised by their parents. I think all baby dinosaurs were raised by an adult. Now, in the case of duckbills, it might have been like ostriches. A lot of females may have laid their eggs in one nest and maybe a male sat on them or the female sat close to them till they hatched. But still, an adult of that species is raising them. When you see the picture of that little tiny Chasmosaurus, you'll probably come to the same conclusion. You'll look at it and go, man, that thing is cute, but it wouldn't survive 5 minutes in a place where there were predators. So that means they probably lived in herds, and I bet they did. Its number one predator would have been Daspletosaurus, or the babies, it would have been Dromaeosaurus. Both of those dinosaurs, in my opinion, would have been the predators that were preying on these. Now, the Dromaeosaurs are not big enough to take on an adult Chasmosaurus. Daspletosaurus, absolutely it could. Daspletosaurus is a big tyrannosaur. It's a big dude. And so, but I don't think it could catch them. Even though the Dromaeosauruses were probably faster, doesn't do you any good. You don't see a cheetah attacking a zebra because the zebra is too big. Cheetah can't do it. So, in my opinion, Dromaeosaurs are probably seeking out the babies, and the Daspletosaurs are seeking out the babies that wander away from the safety of the herd, or they're looking for something that's weak, one of them that's injured or hurt or sick. That's going to be the prey item. So if you and I could travel back in time to that period during the late Cretaceous, if we saw a big herd of Chasmosaurs, I think a Daspletosaurus would have run towards them. It has no intention of chasing them down. It's not going to. But what it's trying to do is it's trying to make the sick, the weak, the old, and the young stand out. When they're all running, those are the ones at the back of the group. And that's the ones that Daspletosaurus is going to target because it's more likely it's going to catch one of those instead of trying to take on a healthy one. Because in my opinion, I believe that they would have been incredibly fast compared to predators. All right. For those of you in Texas or in Louisiana or Oklahoma or New Mexico or Colorado or Arizona, if you're interested, I will bring my traveling museum to your school. Now, there's a cost. I can't do it for free. But if you go to dinosaurgeorge.com, or if you have your parents, or if you know somebody from a school, your teacher or something, if you go to dinosaurgeorge.com, you can click on the Traveling Museum tab, and that will give you all the details about it. We come in, we turn the whole gym into a museum. We're there for a whole day plus the evening. Every student gets to participate. If you would like to have my traveling museum come to your school, now, unfortunately, we just can't drive all over the United States because we're on the road so much. We stay so busy in Texas. There's thousands of elementary schools. We only go to elementary schools, by the way, and we do some intermediate schools. But there's so many thousands of elementary schools in Texas, I can't see them all in my lifetime. So we rarely take a job like, I think recently somebody from New Jersey wants us to come up there, which I wish we could. But the problem is that's 4 days to get up there and 4 days to get back. That's 8 days that we can't work because we're on the road. So in 8 days, if we're here in Texas, in 8 days, I can see 7 schools or 6 schools. And so you've got to be in or around Texas or very close to Texas in order for us to do that. All right, let's answer some questions.
Do you have any questions about dinosaurs? Just ask Dinosaur George. You can post your questions on the Dinosaur George Kids Facebook page or click on the Dinosaur George podcast page at dinosaurgeorge.com. Questions are chosen at random, and you can submit as many as you want. And now, here's Dinosaur George.
Okay, in this particular podcast, all of the questions I got, these are all members of the Patreon Club. So these are Patreon Club questions. For those of you that are not a Patreon Club member, you can still go to our website and click on the Contact Us button, and you could submit your questions through there. I think, actually, if you go to the website and you click on the podcast page, at the bottom of that page, there's a form that you can fill out. When you submit it, it comes to us, and I'll try to answer those on future ones. So let's go. This is from Boplodicus, who said, if Chasmosaurus' horns are technically spikes that hang down from the frill, what ceratopsian actually has the most horns? Wow. Wow, that's a great question. For those of you that are not familiar, horns, what we call a horn, is the part that comes off of the skull. But on the frill, those spiky things on the frill are called spikes. They're not horns. Those are spikes because they're not connected to the skull. They're connected to the frill. Yes, the frill is connected to the skull, but we call them spikes. So Styracosaurus has a horn on its nose and spikes on its frill. So the point that Boplodicus is making is Chasmosaurus has these weird-looking spikes that kind of point down. They sort of hang down over the top of its frill. So then which one has the most horns? Well, that becomes tough. It's probably Pentaceratops, because Pentaceratops has 2 brow horns and a nasal horn. But it also has 2 little horns sticking off of its cheek. And because it's connected to the skull, they count as horns. So in my opinion, Pentaceratops, penta means 5. Pentaceratops, that means 5 horn face. Pentaceratops, in my opinion, is correct. If I'm wrong, leave your comments down in the comment section of YouTube, or go to my Patreon, Facebook page, and leave your comments there. I may be wrong. Okay, Chloesaurus Rex from Iverness, Scotland, love Scotland, who happens to be 10 years old, said, where did Ankylosaurus live? Well, Ankylosaurus is a lowland floodplain animal, meaning it doesn't go up into the mountains. So first of all, regional-wise, it lived in the lowland areas where more rain came and rain would accumulate. And that would mean that there's more plants. Remember, Ankylosaurus is not a tall dinosaur, so it's got to live in a place where there's a lot of food that grows at its height. Because if it lived in a forest, like a pine forest, it would starve to death because it can never reach any leaves because there's nothing on the floor. So it lived in an environment. Now, it didn't live in a swamp because it's not made for walking through swampy water. When I say a floodplain, I don't mean it floods every day. I mean, like maybe once a season it might flood. Maybe it doesn't flood for several years in a row. But what it means is when it does rain, like up in the mountains, that rainwater ultimately comes down into the lowland floodplains. So there are rivers and lakes down there that accumulate water, and so that means there's always plenty of water to drink, and there's plenty of water for the plants. So they lived in North America, Chloesaurus Rex. I believe they're found in Wyoming, Montana, South Dakota, Canada. I think they've been found in all those locations, I think. Ankylosaurus is found in Canada. I know Euoplocephalus is found in Canada, but I may be wrong about Canada, but I do think it's It's Wyoming, Montana, and South Dakota that I'm aware of. All right, my assistant Noah, who's 15 years old. Noah is my assistant on everything. He's from Colorado Springs, Colorado, where I lived. What do you think about Torvosaurus and its ecological niche? Okay, Torvosaurus is the late Jurassic predator that lived with Tyrannosaurus Rex. Lived with Tyrannosaurus Rex. Listen to me. Lived with Allosaurus. It's my favorite dinosaur. How do I confuse those two? Noah, I think Torvosaurus might have been even a little bit larger than Allosaurus. So Torvosaurus may have been, he was like the great white shark, right? Allosaurus was like the mako. Lots more of them, more fast, a little quicker. Torvosaurus is like the big man on campus, the big critter. And I think Allosaurus kept their distance from them, and Torvosaurus might have made a living also stealing prey from others. May have been a bully, but that's hard to say because I've never been able to see a lot. I've got a Torvosaurus skull in my collection, and it's big, a little more robust than Allosaurus. So I think it may have been one of the top two predators of the two biggest. I think Saurophaganax was even bigger, and then I think Torvosaurus, and then I think Allosaurus. And so I think it sort of was in the upper echelon of the carnivores, but that's a great question. All right, 7-year-old Patrick Rex from Tampa, Florida says, what were Carnotaurus's horns used for? Carnotaurus. That is the only predatory dinosaur, in my opinion, who used horns as its main weapon. I believe it used them as weapons. I don't think Allosaurus used it. I don't think Albertosaurus, Daspletosaurus, Torvosaurus, Albertosaurus, Allosaurus, none of those, in my opinion, use those little hornlets over their eyes. They all have little hornlets. I call them hornlets because they're not very pronounced. Those, I think, were recognition. Remember how I said when I was talking about Chasmosaurus and the little osteoderms going around the outer edge of the frill? In my opinion, those hornlets were used for recognition. Maybe they change color as the animal matured. So if you are a male Allosaurus and you see another male Allosaurus, maybe those things are colored yellow. And maybe the brighter yellow they are, the more mature it is. That's nature's way of preventing an unnecessary fight. Nature doesn't want animals to fight and kill each other. It doesn't make any sense. But nature allows you to have a hierarchy, to be in charge. And to do that, it requires sometimes fights. The fights are usually not to the death. So there's a lot of posturing. Posturing means, you stand up, you puff up. In humans, we make a fist, we snarl, those are postures. Those are signals that say, get away from me, get away from me. And so I think that color can help that. I think if two Allosauruses meet in a forest and one of them's color is brighter on their hornlet, the one with the lighter color recognizes that one's older than me. It probably knows how to fight. It's probably stronger. I'm going to leave. We're not even going to fight. Why should either one of us get injured? But when it comes to Carnotaurus, now those horns are too thick. They're big. They're heavy duty. Those are wrecking balls. Those things are meant to cause damage. Maybe the males fought with each other for dominance. But I think, in my opinion, Carnotaurus could have lowered its head and come running in like a battering ram and knocked its prey off its feet. I think it would have been capable of doing that. Those horns are too big to just be used for display. Nature is very careful about what it builds on a body. Chasmosaurus has holes in its frill because it made it lighter. So in my opinion, Carnotaurus has heavy-duty horns to make them stronger. And so in my opinion, I believe that it would have used those horns as a weapon. Great question, Patrick Rex. Okay, Cha-Cha-Cha Raptor Wyatt, who's 5 years old and lives in Des Moines, Iowa, said, why did T-Rex have bone-crushing teeth? Great question. People who get to see their first real T-Rex tooth are almost always disappointed because the first thing they want to do is touch the tip because you think it's going to be pointy, and it's not. It's round. Here's why. If you have an incredibly powerful jaws, and when you crunch down with those jaws, you can crack bone. Well, if you have skinny, pointy little teeth, every tooth is going to break. You're going to break every tooth in your mouth off the first time you apply pressure. But if your teeth are round, then you can apply much greater pressure without the tooth breaking. Think about this. When you take a pencil and you put it in a pencil sharpener and you make that pencil super, super, super sharp with a tiny, pointy little edge, what is the first thing that happens when you try to write with a super, super, super sharp pencil? The lead breaks, the tip breaks. Because the minute you apply a pressure, because it's too thin. But if you have a pencil that you haven't sharpened in a long time and it's just a big round edge, man, those things, you can almost stand on them and they won't break. That's the same thing. The reason why it does that is two reasons. One, because it has an incredible bite force. And if it didn't have those rounded teeth, then it would probably snap every tooth off. But there's another reason. I believe that Tyrannosauruses actually crunched up and ate the bones of the animals. Here's why I think that. When we find animals that have been attacked by what we assume is a Tyrannosaurus rex, or we hypothesize, the bones are crunched up into pieces. They're crunched into pieces. I believe that Tyrannosaurus rex is getting calcium from the bones that it's eating. The problem with being a carnivore is you don't have as much calcium in your diet. So I think that it is literally eating the bones, crunching them up and swallowing the bones. I think that's what it did, to get not only the meat from the animal and not only the marrow from within the bones. I think they ate the bones themselves. I believe they literally chewed on and gnawed on the bone, and so they needed teeth to be able to do that. Very, very good question. Okay, this is from Benny, age 10, Azurian, age 7, and Lowell, age 4, from Lister 4, from Enterprise, Utah. They said, in southern Utah, we frequently find plant fossils. Would it be possible to find dinosaur bone in places where you can find plant fossils? Absolutely. In fact, plant fossils are incredibly important to paleontology because it lets us know the environment where the animal was living. Yes, I found fossilized leaves next to dinosaur bones. And that tells me which plant that dinosaur bone is eating. What plant that dinosaur is eating, or at least what it's living next to. And so it's paleobiology is the study of prehistoric plants. Paleobiologists never get enough credit. Everyone that finds and digs up dinosaurs, they get all the credit, right? Everybody, woo, you found a dinosaur. But not a lot of people go, wow, they found a fossilized pine tree. But in every painting, in every drawing, in almost every educational book where the author or the artist talks or shows what they eat, how do we know what kind of plants they're eating? Because I'm paleobiologist. Wait, paleobotanist. Did I just say paleobiologist? Come on, man. My head is still in Montana. I'm still digging up dinosaurs in my mind. Boy, I had such a great time doing that. So, there's a very, very good chance, and it's a very important thing, because also those fossilized plants tell us what the environment is like. They can tell us if it's a plant that lives in swamps, if it's a plant that lives in desert. And so when we find dinosaurs next to it, we have a whole bunch of information given to us, and you can thank a paleobotanist for that. Okay, as a matter of fact, I mentioned Dr. Eva Kupelhaus, who was Dr. Phil Curry's wife. She's a paleobotanist. She's a person that's very important to science because she's out there figuring out what the environment was like. Okay, what else have we got? Let's go with Emery. Little Emery from Texas says, hey, El Stinko, what is the smallest tyrannosaur, and could you do a podcast on Monolophosaurus? Well, what did you call me? Did that kid just call me El Stinko? Let me tell you something. I don't know who this El Stinko person is, but I'm going to tell you kids right now. I'm not El Stinko because no one knows the identity of El Stinko. El Stinko is an amazing superhero, and no one knows the identity. Okay, so what was the smallest tyrannosaur? I believe it is Dilong. I think Dilong is the earliest member and the smallest member I know of. I don't think it's Guanlong. I think it's Dilong. I'm almost certain that's it, Emery. I think it is Dilong. Now, you're asking if I can do a podcast on Monolophosaurus. Yes, that's a good suggestion, too. I like Monolophosaurus. For those of you that don't know, Monolophosaurus has what looks like a kind of a ridge down the middle of its nose. We think it's a resonating chamber that it uses for making sounds or maybe improving its sense of smell. But that's a good suggestion. I'll try to do that. And finally, this is from my very, very good friend and longtime Patreon Club member. This is from Ethan, who's 9 years old that lives in Michigan. Ethan's name is Fire Tablet. So one day, when you're a Patreon Club member, well, Ethan's a T-Rex member, so Ethan joins us for 2 meetings a month. Everybody puts their name on there. And one time Ethan forgot, and all it said was Fire Tablet. It was on his name. He didn't get a chance to change it. So I decided from that point on I was going to call that kid Fire Tablet. So he's the only member that actually got a name for me. He doesn't even get to give himself a dinosaur name. His name became Fire Tablet. All right, so what is the purpose of the antorbital fenestra? What a brilliant question. The antorbital fenestra, let me grab a skeleton. I got a skull behind me. Hang on. All right, for those of you watching on YouTube, I'm holding up a dinosaur skull. When you look at the skull, let's say a predator is a perfect example. There's a bunch of different holes in the skull, and all of these holes have a function. Well, the eye hole is always the second hole from the back of the skull. So you count the holes. 1, 2. When you get to the second hole, that's the eye. But right in front of that is another hole. Now, most people, when they look at a dinosaur skull, especially a carnivore, they always assume that third hole is the eye. It's not. The eye's back in the back. So what is the purpose then of that big hole? Well, Ethan, I believe there are 2 purposes for it. One, it probably allowed heat exchange. And what I mean by that is the body produces heat. As you move around and walk around, we produce heat. Well, the skull, the brain of a dinosaur is really small in comparison to its body size. When an animal's brain overheats, that's a very, very dangerous thing to happen. Because when the brain overheats, your brain is like a computer. If a computer overheats, it shuts down. If the brain shuts down, everything stops working. So I believe, now there would have been skin that covered the antorbital fenestra. There was skin covering it. You wouldn't have known that hole was there. The next time you guys look at a dinosaur toy or a sculpture or even a painting, look directly in front of its eyes and you'll see a dent. You'll see a dent on either side of the skull. That's the antorbital fenestra. That's what Ethan is talking about, the antorbital fenestra. So skin would have covered that. What I think, Ethan, is the heat building up in the skull could have escaped through that, which would have been sort of like air conditioning for the brain. I think that's it. There's another possibility, and that is, just like with Chasmosaurus, if there was bone filling that spot, it's going to add weight. And when you're a predator especially, you want to be able to move quick, fast. You don't want to carry around a brick strapped to your head because it makes your head turn slow. So in my opinion, I believe that the antorbital fenestra served 2 purposes. It was to cool the skull and ultimately cool the brain, and it was to make the skull lighter so that it wasn't carrying around a bunch of extra weight. All right, my friends, that concludes this one. I'm sorry I didn't get to any who would wins. Oh, wait, you know what? Just a minute. You know what? I got a couple more seconds. We're gonna do one.
Who would win? What if 2 different prehistoric creatures fought? Who would win? T-Rex versus a giant wolf? Raptor versus terror bird?
Spinosaurus versus Triceratops. You choose the animals, and Dinosaur George will size them up and pick a winner. Now, get ready. It's time to find out who would win.
You know, I've got this countdown clock that tells me how long I've been going on, and it's like flashing, telling me to end this podcast. But nobody tells Dinosaur George what to do because I am Dinosaur George, and I'll do whatever I want. Okay, let's go. Now, to submit a who would win, you have to be a T-Rex member of the Patreon Club, so these are all coming from them. This is from June, the Dino Expert. Says, hey, El Stinko, we listened to you. Stop right there. What did you just call me, kid? We listened to your podcast for hours on our family vacation. That's very kind of you. You make sure to tell your guardians or your parents, thank you. Thank you, Mom or Dad or whoever is with you. Thank you. Thank you for allowing me to be entrusted enough to spend time with your family. I appreciate that very much. All right, so who would win was Dilophosaurus versus Velociraptor. I love you, little Georgie Pants. Love June, your biggest fan. Well, first of all, stop calling me little Georgie Pants. How did I get these nicknames? El Stinko, little Georgie Pants. Those are my names. I love you too. All right. Dilophosaurus versus Velociraptor. This is an interesting one. Now, Dilophosaurus has the size. It's got relatively long arms and 4 claws. That's going to be very helpful when you're fighting another predator because you either want to grab them and slice them or you want to hold them and keep them away so they can't bite you. Have you ever had like an older brother or sister put their hand on your forehead and push you away and you're like trying to swing but you can't hit them because they're simply holding you away with their hand? That's kind of sort of what Dilophosaurus may have been able to do. But where Dilophosaurus has size, Velociraptor has speed, and it would be very difficult for it to catch one. I think Dilophosaurus, I think Velociraptor would have been able to come at a full run and run right up its leg and launch itself onto its back. I think it could have gotten there, and it could have inflicted a lot of injury. But the problem with the Velociraptor is they're lightweights. They're not heavyweight fighters. Velociraptors did what I think is the slash and dash method. Run in, slash, dash, get away. Wait. Let the animal get worn down from blood loss. Run in, slash and dash, go. Whereas big raptors like Utah Raptor and Deinonychus, I think those guys would have come in like brutes. Like the fight is on and I'm not stopping till you go down. So in this particular case, I'm going to actually give it to Velociraptor because I believe with enough repeated assaults, it could injure the Dilophosaurus enough to where Dilophosaurus wouldn't be able to fight back. So, and that's crazy because it's a David and Goliath fight. Like Dilophosaurus is big compared to Velociraptor. But in this particular case, I'm going to give it to them. Thank you, June. Okay, Aetoraptors is Indominus Rex versus Mamenchisaurus. Hey, I like this one. Wow. So Mamenchisaurus, I need to do a podcast on Mamenchia. If I haven't, I need to. Mamenchisaurus has got an exceptionally long neck. Incredibly long neck. Looks weird. Almost looks like the dinosaur is going to fall head first in the ground because its neck is longer than the rest of its body. So let's take a look at this. Indominus Rex is built out of predators. It's definitely a predator. Now, Indominus doesn't have the learned experience because it was raised in captivity and it doesn't know. If you took a lion, an African lion that's been raised from birth in a zoo, and one day you took it to Africa and you turned it loose, it would die. It would starve because it doesn't understand what to do against things it's never seen. It's never seen a zebra. It may have eaten meat from a horse or from a zebra. That's because it was fed. So it wouldn't know how to catch it. So that's going to be detrimental to Indominus Rex. It doesn't know what it's doing. Yeah, it swings and growls and bites and stomps and rips and shreds. But again, it's never been up against something like Mamenchisaurus. The tail of Mamenchisaurus, in my opinion, would have absolutely been a weapon, and I believe Mamenchisaurus would win this particular one. Jack wants to know who would win, Dakota Raptor versus Utah Raptor. Well, I'm here to say that I spent some time at the Black Hills Institute with Pete Larson, who's a paleontologist, and I had a talk about Dakota Raptor. And He believes it's absolutely a legitimate animal, and I think I do too now after seeing some of the evidence. So Dakota raptor is late Cretaceous, Utah raptor is mid-Cretaceous, and Dakota raptor has an advantage because it was a later version. And as time progresses, animals get better and better and better because the best ancestor is the one that lives to breed and make new ones. So you're getting the best of the best in every generation. And so in my opinion, that gives that dinosaur an advantage. Looking at its skeleton, I think it would have been much faster. So I would have given that to that. That's a good one. Okay, Jude and Theoraptor would like to know saber-toothed cat versus Spinosaurus. Interesting battle, guys. Interesting battle. That's going to be kind of a tough one. Spinosaurus is just too big. And even though those teeth are long on Smilodon, on the saber-tooth, I don't think they would have been long enough to cause enough internal damage. I will give this one to Spinosaurus. Okay, this is from Asheraptosaurus Rex. Wants to know who would win, Parasaurolophus versus Micropachycephalosaurus versus Triceratops versus Stegosaurus. Well, Micropachycephalosaurus, that animal's going to sit there and it's going to be wearing a jetpack. And when the fight starts, it's going to fly off. That leaves Parasaurolophus, Triceratops, and Stegosaurus. Now, Stegosaurus has great weapon on its tail, but those are defensive weapons. They're not made to attack. Stegosaurus doesn't run backwards swinging the tail. So Stegosaurus, all you have to do is outmaneuver Stegosaurus. Its main thing is just keep turning to keep its tail in your vicinity. Parasaurolophus, not going to survive this fight at all. It's got a foot it could kick. It could use its tail, but that's not going to cause the damage. So Parasaurolophus is the first to go. That then leaves Triceratops and Stegosaurus. And in my opinion, I believe based on the skeletal design, Triceratops would have been absolutely capable of turning quickly enough to get around behind Stegosaurus and ultimately win. And just as Triceratops stands up and takes credit for winning, Micropachycephalosaurus comes flying back in with its jetpack, and it's carrying a hammer, and it doinks him right on the end of the nose, and the Triceratops faints. The winner, Micropachycephalosaurus! Thank you all very much for listening to this podcast. Have a great day, everybody. Be kind to everybody around you. Say nice things to people. Because when you grow up, if you were mean to somebody, that's going to make you feel sad because you can't go back and fix it. So don't break it. Treat people nice. Till next time, everybody, thank you all so very much. I hope you enjoyed this.
Thank you for listening to Dinosaur George Kids. Join the Dinosaur George Kids Facebook group, become a member of our Patreon club, and check out our website store for cool fossils, rocks, and crystals. Visit dinosaurgeorge.com for details. Until next time, keep digging for knowledge.